Hello, everybody, to today's episode of the Lion-Faced Guru podcast. With me today is Kim Katami from Finland, who's not only the original founder of this podcast, but also the founder and head teacher of Pemako Buddhism, of which I'll say a few things in a minute. My name is Ugi Mueller. I'm from Switzerland, and I have been a student of Kim and a practitioner of Pemako Buddhism for some time now. And it's a great honor to be here and discuss this very important topic. Today's topic is going to be the crucial role of personal experience and transparency regarding personal experience on the Buddhist non-dual path and any other non-dual path to liberation. If one looks at today's spiritual teachers, whether they come from traditional or modern approaches, one cannot help but notice the lack of transparency regarding their own experiences and attainments. In general, there's very little talk about the actual experiential shifts and stages of the non-dual path to liberation. This is very misleading, since mapping the non-dual path from awakening to complete liberation has been done for thousands of years. Evaluating personal experience and determining where one is on the spiritual path has actually been a major part of the most successful spiritual traditions of the last 2 millennia. And by successful, I mean the number of completely realized Buddhas that a tradition has generated. So today's episode will be all about the actual personal experience and the experiential stages of the non-dual path, as well as how to practically get there. For this important topic, I personally couldn't think of a better expert than Kim Katami, who's sitting on the other end here. Hi, Kim.
Hey.
Kim Katami is the head teacher and founder of Pemako Buddhism, an international Buddhist Sangha, which to date has about 70 active practitioners. Statistically, our Sangha has a women-man ratio of 50%, and we have people from all professions and ages, the youngest being around 25 and the oldest being around 75 years old. Practice-wise, Pemako is a pragmatic and non-religious lineage of Vajrayana, or Tantric Buddhism, a path which promises the possibility of attaining complete Buddhahood in this lifetime. You might have heard the names Dzogchen or Mahamudra, which are the two most common practice lineages of Vajrayana, and are also the meditation practices of Pemako, as well as some innovations of these practices. Okay. Introduction is over. Let's get this important discussion started. And I'd like to begin with the following spicy question. Kim, what have been the biggest changes in your life you've noticed from your own non-dual Buddhist practice?
Well, first of all, maybe I could say that to me, the reason why I started practicing was like a classic problem and classic reason. And I started practicing because through different experiences early on in life, I saw the kind of the futility and the problems of the way how people live and think and feel. And I also saw, death when I was a really small child, the death of my pet dog. It died in front of my eyes. And, and I had as a child and as a youth, I grew up in an environment and people who were really confused, a lot of problems, and there was not harmony. So these were the causes that really kind of led me to question about my existence and the existence of others. What is going on here? This doesn't make sense. Or what's the point? What's the meaning of life? So that's what I also had a lot of what one could say or call mystical experiences. Although there's nothing unusual. I would say there's nothing unusual or strange about mystical experiences, because a lot of people have mystical experiences in one form or the other. So there was nothing unusual in them, but I had also a lot of those, since I was a small boy. And yeah, those things led me to spirituality, led me to reading books when I was a youngster. I still remember the first yoga book that I bought. It was like a library sale, old books from the library being sold. And I was 14, and I bought a book that was about yoga practice and hatha yoga and pranayama, like breathing exercises and mantras. And I remember I still have the book, and it had pictures of Krishna and Radha, Hindu masters. So yeah, it was a long process through childhood and youth that kind of just drew me to meditation practice and dharma practice. And I went to different meditation meetings. This was in the mid-90s in Finland, right? And Finland is still, like, culturally, dharma-wise, Finland is, the culture is not even nearly as evolved here as it is in mainland Europe or United States. We don't have that many centers and groups and teachers. We just don't have. But in the mid-90s, I was living in the capital area in Helsinki, and I went to different meditation groups. There were a few of them during those days, but it wasn't until I was 23 years old. I had done a good career in music, short, but I would say good career in music. And it kind of clicked for me that I kind of found meditation and dharma practice, of which I had known for many years. But so that's how I started practice. And when you ask that, what are the biggest changes due to my dharma practice, I wanted to tell you all this to explain what for I was practicing, what was the reason for practice. And my case it's a classic case of existential confusion, existential suffering, dukkha, as it's called in the Buddhist tradition. Dukkha literally means pain. So that's what it was. And when I finally clicked with meditation practice, I kind of just like lost sight of everything else. Like the instant when I walked to a Zen meditation introduction, I literally grabbed the handle of the door, and when I grabbed that, I knew that this was it. And from that day onwards, I started sitting 8 hours a day, every day. And I continued that for many years. But yeah, so from the first sitting when I was 23, I really wanted to get a taste or understand or experience this awakening or enlightenment that a lot of Buddhist books speak about. And a lot of, I remember reading books from like Hindu tradition, Hindu yoga tradition, they speak about it, or they use those terms at least. And Eckhart Tolle's book was already a big book back in those days. So, everybody was basically talking about it. And I wanted it because how people describe it, whether it was like there was some details of it, or if it was just a vague description of what awakening or enlightenment is, I intuited that that's exactly what I want. That's exactly what I need. That's the solution to my issues and problems. That's the solution to my existential confusion. So yeah, I'm just saying this to describe that, I'm a classic case of suffering. And so I started practicing a lot. And I first practiced in Zen Buddhist tradition for about 4 years. I lived in Japan for a while and was really fortunate to have karmic connection with 2 very wonderful Zen masters from the Rinzai tradition. And one of the other of them was Terayama Tanchu Sensei. Terayama Sensei was also a master in Zen calligraphy and also Zen martial arts. So he was really the main master for me back from the Japan days. And a lot of his influence is actually still present in my Dharma work. The other Zen master in whose temple I trained for a while is Shodo Harada Roshi. He's the founder of One Drop Zen organization, which is a big worldwide Zen Buddhist organization. So I did Zen practice for about 4 years, and I put everything into it, everything I got. I was still a very young man, like 24, 25. I was quite restless. I had a lot of romantic ideas about practice, but nevertheless, I followed the instructions to the letter. But even after 4 years, I hadn't had this insight, this awakening, this kensho, as it's called in Rinzai tradition. And I knew people, my friends in the temple and from other Zen Buddhist groups who had kensho. So anyway, I didn't have it. And after 4 years of sitting 8 hours or more a day, never missing a day, I kind of just came to a dead end. And I realized that I've been working so hard. I basically put as much effort and time into that practice as it takes one to become a master in any field of science or knowledge in university. But I didn't even have the first taste. So I realized that, okay, this doesn't work for me. I have to figure out another way.
So sorry to interrupt you. So you were basically a case of, which is not the standard. You had the determination, but you didn't have the technique. And many people today have the techniques available through the internet and everything, but don't have yet that determination that you had.
Oh, that's a good way of putting it. Yes, I think it was like I definitely had readiness. I just had the wrong practice and wrong, like irrelevant instructions. I say this with respect. I'm not criticizing any people, or I don't mean anything negative or bad with it, but honestly speaking, the practice didn't work for me. It didn't solve my problem, and that's what I came to do, you know. so yeah, that's what happened. So yeah, after those Zen days, I quickly, and in retrospect, you know, I haven't thought about it in a while, but I was very fortunate to. It was kind of like a whole different is it avenue open for me in dharma practice. It was really painful for me to, because I loved Zen. I loved it. I loved the tradition. I trusted the tradition, you know, and I think I can say that I was pretty good student, because, you know, I always listened to what my teachers told me, and I never forgot what they said. But then, you know, it was painful for me to kind of drop my love and my, you know, it was painful for me to leave Zen practice behind me. But then when I did, because I simply couldn't get around the fact that the practice didn't work for me. I was pretty much, you know, I was as deluded as I was 4 years before. I was calmer a little bit, and I could focus my mind like a laser. No, I became really, really good at that, but it didn't remove my delusion, self-delusion. And that was the problem. So when I finally had the courage, I would say, out of necessity, to leave Zen behind, then things started quite quickly changing for me. So I switched from Zen to a Hindu Tantric teaching called Kriya Yoga. And I was very fortunate to connect with a couple of really good lineages of Kriya Yoga. And it's changed a lot of things for me experientially. You know, in Kriya Yoga, there's a big emphasis on loving devotion, or bhakti, as it's called in Hindu yoga. And that was a really big one, because in Zen, there's none of it. So I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but, you know, just a different kind of system. So this opening my heart and developing love towards the masters of the lineage and the founder of the lineage was a big change for me. So I studied Kriya Yoga in 2 different lineages, learned it in several more, and I practiced it for several years. But then again, I had the problem that, okay, this did something else to me. You know, I found this beautiful love, and I learned about what we call the Bodhisattva and Mahasiddha bhumis in Pemako practice, the centers above the head. These really, really important centers that are not only energy centers. You know, we can speak about that later. But I learned about that, and it did something really meaningful. But again, after 4 years of that practice, no shift. There was much more love, much more relaxation, much more kind of faith and trust towards dharma, towards my personal path, but no shift. And then my main Kriya Yoga teacher had passed away at that point, a year earlier. And then I was speaking to my teacher's most student, who is an Indian lady called Devi. And, you know, I was speaking with Devi about this problem that I had. My practice of 8.5 years at that point, of 8 hours or more sitting a day, hadn't affected a shift. And then Devi suggested me a mantra, a certain mantra that she gave me an empowerment for. And the first time I practiced it, it popped. So this is a mantra of so my teacher, whose name was Sivakami was a mystic who revealed many wonderful Shaiva Tantra and Kriya Yoga teachings. And she also taught me about mystical experience and what is basically Tantric Guru Yoga. So she taught me a lot of that. And so Devi, my big sister in that lineage, she gave me a mantra, and it removed this knot from behind my eyes. You know about that knot, don't you, Ugi?
Yes,
so that mantra was the mantra of the son of Shiva. Shiva has 2 sons in the Shaiva Tantra teachings. So there's Shiva, the father, Parvati, the mother, and they have 2 sons, which are Ganesh, that elephant-headed deity, and the other one is Muruga. Muruga is the lord of yogis and yoginis. So it was the mantra of Muruga that did the trick for me. And that was the first shift for me. Like, it finally, finally, I remember actually that session that was in 2011. I was about to sit down to practice the mantra for the first time, and I already knew before saying the mantra that this will do it. And I sat down, and it popped that knot from behind my eyes, and that was it. I knew. So after a few days, it didn't change for me. The shift stayed. And then after a couple of days, I contacted Devi and asked her if that was the real thing. And I gave a description of it, and she said that no doubt, that's it. So that was the first one, and it didn't come through Buddhist practice. So my path of insight or Buddhist insight started with Shaiva Tantric deity.
Just
sorry. Yeah, please.
Just one question. You said the shift was permanent, didn't change.
Yeah.
So let's compare this shift with the states of love that you experienced in your practice before you did the mantra, this emotional love. So how would you describe the difference?
That's an excellent question. I was just about to talk about that. So what happened with that shift was that, and this is, you can read what I'm about to say exactly from, for example, Shakyamuni Buddha's account. So the thing was that when I sat down to meditate, to practice, it was like not only that I became physically still, but in my mind, because of those practices, this, like how should I say, like a realm or world or mind of freshness, purity, clarity, and love and kindness revealed, right, during practice. But when I stood up, something came back. And I didn't really know what that something was. I knew it was related to the, self-delusion, like whatever that meant. I had read it 100 times from different sources by then. So what happened was that this sense of meanness, I-ness, came back when I wasn't practicing. And this is exactly the problem Shakyamuni Buddha had, because he was practicing jhanas, those meditative absorptions, for but 7-8 years, and then he figured out that I still have the problem when I first had when I left the temple. so that's what changed. So whether I was sitting or active after that first shift didn't matter. The self, the me, the sense of meanness didn't come back the same way it used to come. So that was the first one. Just fast forward. After that first one, it took about 1.5 years when I had the second shift. And I don't actually remember what practice I did. That would have been early 2013. I don't remember what practice I did, but nevertheless, I had a second shift. And then a few months later, I had a third shift. And by then I had figured out that, okay, these are coming like as a succession, one after the other. And, I realized that with each shift, there was a definite change. These shifts were like awakenings, further awakenings within the awakened state already. So, it was kind of more integration or more growing into it. I'm doing this, but I don't mean becoming bigger. I just mean becoming clearer, becoming I guess I could say that just becoming myself with each, like something dropping away with each shift. And I haven't mentioned it in this interview yet, but I did briefly, but I've had these mystical experiences since I was a little boy. And I had visitations from what I now know to be masters, spiritual masters, really well-known spiritual masters. And I had that happen frequently since I was about 3-4 years old. So at some point when I had that was when I shifted from Zen Buddhism to Kriya Yoga. It was very soon after that transition when I started to have these visitations again. And so these masters would come. I would have what would be called a mystical vision, and they would give me advice. I could ask for instruction, and they would give me teachings, practices to practice. And this was the time when I started Kriya Yoga, when my teacher, she was American, Sivakami, when she had done that for 2-3 decades already. So she was very familiar with that kind of karmic connection with non-physical masters, and she was a virtuoso when it came to mystical things. She was really, really hardcore yogini. I haven't really spoken about her, but I guess I should at some point. But so she taught me about how to communicate with non-physical masters, what it meant, what the whole deal was. So I started receiving these teachings, and then when I had few of those shifts, one of the non-physical masters who was a Shaiva Tantra master called Ugi Mueller. He gave me a teaching about these centers that are inside the head, 6 here between the level of the eyes, and the first one on the level of the eyes, and the 6th one on top of the head, and then 7 more above the head, like a pillar. If this is on top of my head, like a pillar of subtle energy centers in the space above the head. And so I made the connection that, okay, so my shifts, the shifts that I'm having, those awakenings within the awakened state, are following a pattern. Bam, pop, 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 one by one, every couple of months or so. And so Ugi Mueller was very kind to teach me that, say that, that's how it works. That's the mechanism. And so this mechanism, as you know, now in Pemako Buddhism is known as the 13 bhumi model, 13 bhumis, 13 grounds. So 13 grounds of attainment, 13 stages related to those 13 subtle centers. And it's also, again, kind of interesting that it was like a Hindu Mahasiddha who first told me about this, right? Mm-hmm. Not a Buddhist one, but nevertheless. So it was around that time, 2013, when this master taught me about the 13 bhumis, 13 grounds, and then I knew that this is how it will evolve for me. And these centers, by the way, I had already known for several years because I had made the connection with those higher centers through Kriya Yoga practice, 8 hours a day. So that's how it came. But I also realized that, that's how it must. That must be the mechanism for everybody else. Everybody else, logically thinking, has these same centers. So it was around that time, 2013, when I started to use the skill of energy reading that I had already learned in Zen calligraphy in my Zen days. You see, my Zen calligraphy master, Terayama Sensei, he didn't give much emphasis on writing Chinese characters or something like this, like writing fine Chinese poems or Zen poems. He was, and what Zen calligraphy is about, it's about the energy that the calligraphy or a ink painting, black ink painting, what it transmits. If the artwork is done by a practitioner who has insight, that insight sticks to the ink through the energy that the person transmits. So that was the main teaching Terayama Sensei taught, and that's when I started making the connection between those dots, between these dots. When I started checking from different people who I met, or from photographs, looking at different teachers, masters, practitioners, I started noticing, sensing from their subtle body that, okay, that person has had, let's say, one shift, one awakening experience that I had also had, or somebody else had had more, somebody else had had less than I had had. I could see that it's all related to these centers. And I did this analysis a lot. I've done, now in Pemako Buddhism, we call this bhumi analysis. You can call it stage analysis or attainment analysis. And I've done probably 5,000-6,000 of those. I've done many, many, many of those. So, I acquired and honed my skill in that sense. So it's a long and winding story, but so you were asking me about biggest changes, right? So there are these centers inside the head and 7 more centers above the head. And 3 highermost of those centers above the head are such centers that they are not, they don't store karmic patterns or habits. They remain pure all the time. And those centers have a corresponding, they correspond to some aspects of our energy body in our mind. But so in this 13 bhumi model, it's the 11th bhumi that is the first so-called Mahasiddha bhumi or master bhumi. So it was the 11th shift that was the second, meaningful shift for me, because it stabilized my natural state. So the first one gave me the first irreversible experience, and then bang, 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 it kept maturing or opening up more. I gained more experiential confidence in my own Buddha nature, in my own enlightened mind, until at the 11th shift, it became my default mode. After that, I didn't have to go looking for it anymore. After that, I didn't have to remove something from my mind to be able to access it. It was just always there. So I had the 11th bhumi opening, 11th shift in, I think, November 2016, which is soon 4 years ago. Yeah, but I also want to say at this point that this 11th opening of 11th bhumi does not mean attaining Buddhahood. So it's only that this natural state becomes stable. You don't have to look for it anymore. It's just always there. But nevertheless, being a Buddha means that you don't have impulses of any type anymore. You don't have any blind spots in your mind, in your energy body. So, and therefore you don't have any surprises, any impulses coming anymore. But with the opening of 11th, 12th, 13th bhumis, the natural state is there, but you still have stuff coming up. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's what it means. I wanted to make the difference between opening and perfecting of bhumis.
Yeah. So also according to my experience with the bhumis and the opening of the 11th, am I right to describe it like that? Probably because I experienced it like that. With the stabilization of the natural state, there's this saying that I don't know if it exists in English, to not see the forest for the trees.
Yes, there is.
You only see trees, but not the forest. And with the Rigpa stabilization, with the 11th bhumi opening, you are aware that the forest is always there. It's not not always, not completely always, but you're always kind of in this mode of, there is the forest. There's not just these trees and these separate entities that I'm interacting with and suffering from, but you have a basic awareness of the forest is there, the big picture.
Sure, yeah.
And but you still run into trees. You cannot just, you're not intuited and completely habituated to the forest yet. So if you just start running, you run into trees. You are not just like one with the forest yet, where you kind of like these crazy runners, they see obstacles like so quickly and jump over all the things because they have this mode of perception. You're still running into the trees of selfing coming up, right?
Yes, whatever is left. Yeah, but it's much easier to deal with it because you have the natural state in such a, like, how do you say, strong, what's the correct English word, like strong, magnified, forceful manner, you know. It's like Vipashyana practice, dealing with whatever is left is much more easier. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that brings me to an additional question. How has, now we are talking about stuff coming up and selfing coming up, and it's easier to deal with it. So I think an interesting question would be, how has this changed your habitual patterns and your thinking patterns? Maybe you had an anxiety of some kind, and or some compulsive thinking or compulsive behavior in some kind. The things people suffer from, just in general. How has this shifted your perception of your patterns, and how has it shifted the patterns themselves, very in detail?
That's another really good question. You only seem to have good questions, Ugi. So yeah, well, that's the process, you know. That's what the, you know, all generations of great masters, especially in Buddha Dharma, because in Buddhism things are very well mapped out, and there's commentaries from excellent, great yogi masters and yoginis, you know, in abundance. You know, they have mapped out and explained everything. So
this is a very important point I would like to stress out for all the viewers, that because I wasn't aware of this, because I thought the non-dual teachings of today, where people kind of try to reinvent the wheel, where everything there is, and it all sounded so mysterious. And then I found out through Kim Katami's teachings that there actually have been this mapping out for thousands of years, where it's where the whole path from a samsaric confused being to complete enlightenment has been mapped out and experientially documented by hundreds and probably thousands of individual cases. And this one has been a biggie for me, to have this, even this mapping clarity in the first place, to see, this is mapped out. This is not as mysterious as it is, as some people make it to be. It's still a mystery for the individual unfolding of it, of course, because you're stepping into the river yourself. But still, this knowledge has been around in humanity, and this is a point that is fatally neglected these days in the non-dual teachings.
Yes. So your question, how have my habits, patterns, or relationship to thoughts changed? It has changed. I'm still pretty much the same guy, you know. I don't consider myself like a great teacher or a great yogi, or, you know, it's nothing like that, you know. So I would say that the shifts and my practice have maybe I would use the word just have made me like a sane in a way, sober in a way, sane and sober, and maybe I would say down to earth, and just simple, and like those you made a short list of anxiety and neuroses and all kinds of things. Yes, I've had a lot of, when I was a teenager, I had panic attacks. I've always had, uh, like from childhood, I remember from the lower elementary school, I started having social anxiety. We were told to give presentations in front of the class, like small lectures about different things, and they didn't tell us how. We were just supposed to go there and do a presentation. And I started having social anxiety back then. I had social anxiety. I was a musician, a guitar player, and because of that, I did a lot of gigs and concerts, and I was always like a nerve wreck before a gig. But when I started playing, it became okay. But before that, I was really anxious, and especially, I've been a full-time Dharma teacher soon for 12 years, and I still have a little bit of social anxiety when I start teaching, but it's much, much, much less than it used to be. Like I remember when I started teaching for several years, I was terrified before I started talking in front of people, and I also had those panic attacks. Just such a strong fear that it completely threw me off. Yeah. And I still have panic attacks, but they are just like if you think of a pyramid, right? So a pyramid of a panic attack. So I had this like a foundational, like a strike of fear or panic, but it has little by little, it has worn off because of these shifts, because of the transformation, what happens with the tantric practice and recognition of the natural state. And now it's just a small tip of it left. So when it happens, panic attack, social anxiety, I think that it's pretty much the same thing, really. It's just a tip of it. I notice it, but then it's already gone. So it's like 1 second of small panic attack. And it used to be like I remember like years ago, before this shift started happening, I was terrified for days. I could be terrified for a week before the next weekend when I was supposed to teach. And it was an awful situation because, I knew I could share all these practices that I had practiced so much, but it was completely, internally, it was completely ruined by this fear and anxiety. So it was very, very hard for me to enjoy teaching. After a weekend of teaching, Saturday, Sunday, I was exhausted. I was literally exhausted. I was drained of energy because of that fear. So this has changed. There's just the tip of that fear, that anxiety. It goes past quickly, and I'm not exhausted anymore after teaching a retreat or a teaching after teaching a weekend or a retreat. So that's definitely changed. I can deliver, what I can do my work, in other words, much, much better and efficiently.
So the practice, if I understand that correctly, is it's not necessarily annihilating patterns on the spot, like making them non-existent, that they don't appear, but it's a way of learning how to look into them, how to see them, how to perceive them, which is freeing, which is liberating, which does change the pattern over the course of time, and make it weaker also in its appearance. But the process is a matter of perspective, a matter of seeing. That no matter if there's the mountain or just the tip anymore, the process remains the same. The non-dual practice of seeing through it, of
Yes.
seeing the natural state in it.
Yes, this is, you just gave the basic understanding of Vipashyana practice. The word Vipashyana is used in different ways in different contexts, and it's used as a title, as a brand. There is a movement called Vipassana retreats, and but when Buddhist meditation is spoken, that always means Vipassana. So Vipassana, it's a Sanskrit word that literally means supreme seeing or clear seeing. And this seeing is seeing through our habits and patterns. But then again, there are different kinds of methods, different kinds of ways to teach that. The way how I teach it and the way I practiced it is first make sure that you have that basic awareness, clear awareness. Make sure that you recognize that there is a recognition of Buddha nature, this wakeful nature. And from there, start looking, the functionings, the phenomena that the mind creates. So it's a very different thing. If we don't first have the recognition of the natural state and try to practice Vipassana within the confused, self-based, samsaric state, not much effect.
Yeah, that was my experience. I mean, before even awakening in 2016, I tried Vipassana techniques, looking at thought, what is its form, what is its color, what is its shape, these classic inquiry questions of traditional Mahamudra Vipashyana technique. But the mind keeps producing so much thoughts, it's hard to actually get somehow stable to even be able to look into it properly. And this changed with awakening, and changed significantly with the 11th bhumi, because you just have this background more or less to rely on, and it's just you don't have to remove, like you said, remove something into clear seeing. You have that available. It's still cloudy and foggy. This is the process itself to cut through this cloudiness, but it's not that you have to switch from one mode of being into a completely different mode of being.
And this is also the difference when traditional Buddhist paths, they speak of shamatha and vipassana, or in Tibetan shine and laktong. In English, you could say that they speak of one-pointed calmness affected by one-pointed concentration, shamatha practice, and vipassana, analytical or insight meditation. So there is a way to, there's a better way, and it is to, instead of practice one-pointed concentration that creates calmness, because that calmness is not the same as the natural state. This is what a lot of people confuse. So this state of calmness or thoughtlessness is not the natural state. It can be, but it necessarily isn't. But Vajrayana masters figured out that uh, that you can replace that shamatha with the natural state, with the recognition of one's Buddha nature, and from there practice Vipashyana. So it's not necessary to do a lot of shamatha practice, following one's breath, for example, 1, 2, 3 years to start practicing Vipassana. It's much, much more efficient and much more nourishing existentially to recognize the natural state and make that a priority. It's possible, of course.
So traditionally, this is what is meant by the pointing out instruction, where the student is introduced to the nature of mind, to recognizing it. And then from there on is the practice of seeing through the seemingly solid phenomena of the mind, the thoughts, the emotions, and coming from that recognition, instead of not having that recognition and kind of deal from a already confused point of reference with the phenomena.
Yeah. And it's kind of, if you start thinking about it, and again, I don't mean this in a negative way, but because it's kind of a critical point towards a couple of approaches. If you are in a samsaric mind state, you cannot sort out the samsaric mind state. It's obvious. And also, like it happens in Zen Buddhism that people are told to practice so-called just sitting, shikantaza meditation, and they are just told to sit down and not do anything, and that this is correct practice, that you only need to sit. Well, it really doesn't work like that. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately, that you could have correct recognition while being in a completely samsaric, confused, self-based state of mind. It just doesn't work that way.
So you mean that the problem is that you are not aware that you're looking from a confused point of view in the first place, and you try to do a practice which more or less requires that point of view already being cleared out or being clear.
Yeah.
And you never get away from your distorted point of view by looking through the eyes of a distorted view. You will never find clarity by having your confused glasses on.
Yeah, exactly. So exactly.
Okay. So now we are already deeply into the everyday business of practicing and teaching the non-dual Buddhist path and experiencing the non-dual Buddhist path. And we just talked about the natural state and how key it is to have that recognition first, how this makes everything so much easier. And I would like to ask of you, Kim, right now, your first recognition of the natural state, your first clear recognition, was that with that Kensho moment when you sat down to recite the mantra? Or was that a different point? Can you remember like the first time that you recognized Rikpa, or the nature of mind?
Oh, so since I was a kid, I had these moments happen hundreds, if not thousands of times. These kind of like shocks when my mind would completely disappear. Like the functioning of mind, like a thinking, feeling, considering myself a person, like considering myself me, Kim, with the history I had, that would at moments completely switch off. So like my mind would disappear, and I think it was like a cessation experience of kinds, but it was terrifying for me because I didn't know what it was. So yeah, I had these disappearing of mind experiences a lot when I was a child and when I was young. And then I think that I had like a proper good Rigpa natural state recognitions during my Kriya Yoga days, many times. But then it was only the first shift that shifted something. It's kind of an interesting thing. I haven't really thought about that at all, but it's kind of interesting. But that's how it happened for me.
And just to kind of follow this this experience along a little bit, since you're a Vajrayana teacher, you have this this concept or this experience of transmission, that the natural state can be transmitted to the student if the student is open to have that seeing happening, the seeing of how things really are for a moment. This is called the pointing out instruction or direct introduction. And the view, the traditional view, or the normal view on this is that it requires a teacher and a student to have that happen. That it's like we discussed, it's not very probable to happen on a zazen cushion when you are looking through a samsaric mind, trying to do Ati Yoga or Dzogchen meditation or some of these highest non-meditation teachings. So when you say you had this as a child, these moments of recognition, do you think you were guided by non-physical masters in this moment, or were these kind of spontaneous, natural happenings for you?
These were spontaneous, natural happenings. But my point was that when I was a kid, I was terrified by the disappearance of my mind because I didn't know what it was. Like it was terrifying. So it was not a correct recognition.
Okay.
Exact. It happened, but it terrified me because, I didn't know what it was. But then later I figured out that, as it kept happening, I figured out that, okay, this is actually something that, it's not scary. It's not, it doesn't do any harm. So it was just so dramatic, like drop, like completely pop, and then it's back. So when the mind came back, it was like scared, like, oh, what the heck just happened, That's what happened. But it wasn't a proper recognition. No.
That's very interesting, and I think a very important point, because there are people around who speak about, they had like years sometimes spent in a mystical experience. I even knew a few people who say, that it came one day and it went for like 2-3 years where they could sit on a park bench and not do anything, and it was just completely blank state of mind and clarity and everything. And then everything started coming back. And it's very interesting to see that this mystical experience, however long they may be, a second or even years for some people, or weeks or months, that they don't necessarily contain the clear recognition of one's natural state.
Yeah, that's very, very important point. And it's really the essential point of, Vajrayana tradition, whether, regardless of the Dharma culture in Tibet or in different places where Vajrayana has been taught. Vajrayana masters have been very, very, how to say, clear on the point that correct recognition of one's wakeful nature is a type of knowledge. It's a type of wisdom, type of knowledge, type of understanding, type of clarity. And that knowledge, wisdom, understanding, the main point in that is that you're not going into a trance state, you're not going into a sleep, you're not going somewhere else. You're present, and in that state of presence, there is knowingness. There is a quality of existential wisdom there, rather than ignorance. So this is something that is really, really important in Tantra and Dzogchen, that the very Tibetan word rikpa, it's a rendition of Sanskrit vidya. Vidya means knowledge. So rikpa means like a knowing awareness. It's awareness or state of mind that is self-cognizant, self-aware, knows itself and knows everything, knows phenomena from the inside. So this knowingness is that golden point of Vajrayana teaching. And this point, it's not clear when talking about trance states, exalted states, some
states of oneness or
states of oneness,
God experiences.
Yes. Then it gets muddied. And I'm not saying that those are good experiences, but those, according to Buddha Dharma, is not the type of experience or state that is the word endures everything or is unchanged. And it's only, according to Buddhist masters, it's only this basic state that that removes self-based suffering. Mm-hmm. So the heavenly states, exalted state, oneness doesn't do it, according to Buddhist masters of the last couple of thousand years.
That's where the teacher really teaches that you learn something, you have an insight, you have a perspective shift that is happening. It's not just an experiential shift of some kind, that the landscape you're looking at changes, or that it's more colorful or impersonalized or anything. It's like seeing into the nature of perception itself, seeing into, and this is what the teacher is here to provide for you, the Vajrayana teacher, that you make this recognition that it doesn't just transmit you a beautiful state of oneness, but that you learn how to see the nature of mind.
Yes. So Mahayana Buddhism and Vajrayana Buddhism. Vajrayana Buddhism is the Tantric extension of Mahayana Buddhism. So Mahayana Buddhism has, like, in terms of theory, in terms of basic bits and pieces, has everything. So Mahayana Buddhism has the view that all sentient beings have a Buddha nature. All sentient beings have this ground state. It's a different question whether all sentient beings can recognize it and be liberated, but human beings can. And other kinds of beings can also, but we are human beings, so that's why we are most interested in that. Mahayana Buddhism says that all human beings have Buddha nature, and that it's possible systematically, methodologically point it out and share it share the dharma with others, share the knowledge, share the wisdom.
Beautiful. That's such a clear point, that it's a knowledge, that it's a seeing that you learn, and which makes you able to see in any experience that you might have, the most heavenly or the most hellish experience, to see the nature of mind in it.
Yeah.
That it's not about, oh, there's this disturbing emotion, I have to do something with it so that it goes away and I'm in nirvana again. It's learning to see it in any phenomena, and
Yeah.
this, when this is exhausted, when this exhausts itself, that absolutely anything could happen in your experience, in your mind. This is called Buddhahood then, right? That when the seeing is automatically on 100% restlessly.
Yes. And also, I think it is, there's a lot of influence from, in Buddhism historically, there's a strong emphasis and strong development of the monastic system, monasticism. And monasticism, as you know, it comes with all kinds of rules, regulations, prohibitions, and in general, the idea of renunciation. And that's a bit of a problem for lay people, because lay people live in, everyday life. They go to work, they have responsibilities, they have children, they have sex, they spend, have good time with their friends, enjoying a good meal and wine. This is all this is it's kind of a problem for the monastic view or the view of renunciation. But in Tantra, in Vajrayana, it's the opposite way around. Whatever you do in life, you can use for practice. Whatever you do, even when drinking wine or having sex with your partner or buying a new car, oh God, you can have recognition as you're doing it. And that's perfect as it is. You don't have to avoid buying a car, or you don't have to avoid having sex or having an orgasm, or you don't have to avoid a beer to practice properly. That's a big difference between like the monastic Buddhism or Sutric Buddhism and Tantric Buddhism.
That's very interesting, because I was one of these people myself. So many people interested in non-duality who come in contact with the Buddhist non-duality and Tantric Buddhism, they don't see that point at all. There is the prejudice, oh God, Tantric Buddhism with all its practices that might feel a little esoteric, uses visualizations and everything. This is some religious, superstitious thing from another culture. But the main idea of Tantra is so extremely fitting for the Western mind in its original idea, like you described it today, just a few minutes ago, that it's in no way changing anything about your normal life, but it's actually take your normal life as your spiritual path.
Yes. Having said that, there could be some benefit of, for example, practicing silence every day, 1 or 2 hours. I'm not saying that these things that monastics do are of no benefit. Feel free to experiment and try yourself. But having said that, it's not a necessity to be silent or to abstain from sexual relationships or social relationships or so on. And that's something that speaks to me.
Mm-hmm. How do you teach this recognition, Kim, to your students?
Through those mystical communications with my masters. And the main master of Pemako Buddhism is Guru Rinpoche, or Padmasambhava, who is famously known for bringing Tantric teachings from India to Tibet. And he's considered the founder of the Nyingma school of Tibetan Buddhism. There's actually a picture of Guru Rinpoche there in that big thangka. So through my connection with Guru Rinpoche and other Tantric masters, I've been fortunate to learn practices and teachings that I think are very direct and concise, short and easy to learn. So when Vajrayana Buddhism is discussed, people mostly associate that term with Tibetan Buddhism because, you know, Tibet for the last 1,000 years has been kind of a stronghold of Tantric Buddhism. And it has been inside the borders of Tibet where there has been countless great practitioners and mahasiddhas, yoginis. So it's mostly people associate Vajrayana with Tibet. But actually, Tantric teachings have been everywhere in Buddhism, in Buddhist countries. Japan, Korea, China, then those Thailand, other countries in that direction. So historically, actually, Tantric Buddhism has been everywhere, not only Tibet, but Tibet has been the stronghold, without doubt. There has been a lot of great practitioners and masters there. But I say this with love and with great respect towards the Tibetan traditions and Tibetan masters, practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism. If we start looking at the way, the method how Tibetan Buddhism is typically taught, to me personally, it didn't appeal because, you know, myself as a Westerner, well, I had time to practice because I organized my life in a way that I could practice a lot. But for most people, you know, typically lay people, they have 1 hour or 2 hours maximum every day for practice. I mean, time for sitting on top of all the practice that happens among activities. So people don't have that much time. And if we start looking the way how Tibetan Buddhism, preliminary practices, their system is built, it simply is not suitable for a Western layperson who has so little time on their hands. So, plus there's the whole like a translation from language, from Tibetan to English, and, you know, the whole Tibetan cultural paraphernalia, the whole exposition. So to me personally, it didn't feel appealing. And I know for a fact, you know, many people have approached me, have said the same thing, that, you know, they just didn't have the time and didn't see the point of doing the traditional tantric preliminaries of 400,000, 500,000 repetitions of simple techniques just to get to a certain number. Many people just don't see the point in that. So, you know, I've been fortunate to have these receive these teachings, remember some teachings from my past lives, such as the 2-part formula, and these are very simple and direct ways. And I will tell you how they are direct. I already told it, but first, a recognition of the natural state needs to be prioritized. That needs to be recognized first, always. That's the priority number one. And what it means is that if I use like a graphical analogy, if we take paper and I make a bundle of a paper. This is a good analogy for samsaric mind. So it's like a bundle of self-based thinking, self-based feeling. So, and somewhere inside there's a center in this bundle of paper. So first we have to learn what that prioritization of the recognition of the natural state means, is that we have to come out from this bundle of paper. We have to get out from our mind. And this can be done, to some people it happens when just speaking to them. They realize that there are all these thoughts flying around, and there's emotional states happening, and there's all this functioning of mind. So you just have to realize that this is not all. That there's this capability of there's this fresh, clear, knowing awareness that can be aware of these things that spin around in the mind. To some people, they can have recognition just like that. Then that recognition can be fine-tuned, and it can be pointed out that not only that there are these thoughts and emotions flying around in the mind space, there can also be subtle energy there that creates subtle dullness, like subtle grayness in the mind. Some people realize that, oh, yes, there is this subtle dullness there, this subtle grayness, and then they can become aware of also that. If those two things happen, that's a valid recognition. So at simplest, that's how it happens. But this is not, this simple instruction is not enough for most people. It's not enough. They can't cultivate that recognition on daily basis with just that instruction. So this is why, there are basically two ways that I teach. The first way is to use the so-called dynamic concentration, dynamic type of concentration practices, which means to create an explosion through a vocal shout or physically tensing the muscles to cut through that bundle of paper, to get out from that bundle of self. So dynamic concentration is a very strong element in Pemako Buddhism. So that's one. That's the most direct. That's kind of what is closest to the traditional Tibetan Dzogchen way of training that we do in Pemako practice. There's another way, which is Tantric way. And Tantra always means mantra, using mantras, reciting syllables. So we use Guru mantras for Guru Rinpoche, Yeshe Tsogyal, or then deities, deity mantras. For example, viewers might know of money mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, or Tara mantra, Om Tare Tu Tare Ture Soha. So, but then for deity, one needs to have, Tantra always also means empowerment. So Tantric practices such as those that I mentioned require an empowerment. Yeah, so those are the main ways, Tantric way or direct way or Dzogchen way, dynamic concentration, that the natural state can be accessed. And I've explained this in my second book, What's Next, on post-awakening practice. In that book, I've explained this in detail, but so I was speaking about shamatha and vipassana before. So there's a lot of strong emphasis on first doing shamatha practice, calmness, concentration practice before practicing vipassana. And this dynamic concentration that uses strong shouts or physically tensing muscles strongly, there's also the element of concentration there. But traditionally, methods, they use this gentle type of concentration, where you, for example, start focusing. Sometimes they even use like a pebble, like a small stone in front of the practitioner, and then the practitioner just stares, engages his or her attention with that object of focus and keeps it there. So it's like a sustained, gentle concentration applied to an object. This is traditional concentration practice. But dynamic concentration is very different. There's a momentary focus, like an explosion of focus. So, for example, it can be shouted syllables shouted in a rhythmical fashion, 5, 10 times at once, or even 50 or 100 times at once. And the beauty of this type of concentration practice that there is no way it doesn't work. It works any day, any time, for anyone. And there's even more beauty to it, is that even if we're talking about Vajrayana teaching, dynamic concentration does not require empowerment. So that's definitely a very strong plus in dynamic concentration practice. Having said that, if one shouts empowerment syllables, empowerment mantras, there's even more benefit in that. But to open bhumis, like I described, one doesn't need an empowerment. You can just start. In my book, I've explained this and given examples which syllables one could use, and for that, one doesn't need empowerment. I actually know people who have contacted me and who have heard about Pemako practices and have read my books, have tried the practices, and without empowerment have reached the opening of all 13 bhumis and stabilized their natural state. That's a big one.
It definitely is. And when you say it doesn't need an empowerment, no tantric empowerment, no mantra, no introduction in any way, then the process itself, how do you bring that together with the idea that you always need a teacher to have you recognize the nature of mind? So one could understand this now. Okay, this is a way that you can practice Dzogchen or Mahamudra or this highest teachings of Buddhism without a teacher.
Well,
there is a big discussion going on, especially from people who are coming freshly to Dzogchen, come from the non-dual circles and say, there's this very, very interesting Buddhist version of it, and then they talk about you need a teacher for
that. Well, I've had many teachers, and I learned something from each one of them. I also was fortunate and unfortunate to have a couple of bad teachers along my way, but that's kind of off topic. But I've had several dozen people who have taught me something. something about meditation, something about different kinds of yogas, something about healing, something about internal martial arts, art, and of course, secular teachers. Teachers have taught me to read and write and do basic mathematics, all of these things. Even my father, he taught me to ride a bicycle. I could see how other people ride bicycles, but it was my father who taught me, who helped me to get on the bicycle and little by little learn to use the pedals and learn it eventually. So I think that's actually a good analogy that, I had seen when I was 4 years old. I had seen many people ride bikes, but nevertheless, they didn't help me to learn how to ride a bike myself. So I've been benefited from my teachers, and I can say that I see that in my students also, that when they hear me talk more or less skillful things, sometimes completely stupid nonsense, when I have bad jokes and whatever stupid stories I share, I can see it from my students that it brings them benefit. And this is just a pragmatical statement. I'm not saying that I'm a Buddha. I'm not saying that I'm a guru. I'm just a guy who I've devoted, all my adult life for practice and figuring things out, figuring how these things work and how it doesn't work. And that's what I'm sharing. And the way how I see it, like we use the word pragmatic Vajrayana, pragmatic dharma. So that's actually what it means to me is that like in secular education, people in a couple of years, people can learn how to become, for example, engineers or electricians, or they can learn some skill, some art in a way that they can become independent professionals. And this aspect is almost entirely absent in Dharma. The pedagogy, or is it pedagogics of Dharma are unfortunately really, really poor, really bad often. And as a Dharma teacher myself, I was always interested how I can remove my own suffering, my own existential confusion. And I feel that as a Dharma teacher, I want to enable that, at least in the same extent that I have reached, to my Dharma friends and students. That's all. I don't want anybody to follow me or bow down to me. I don't want any of that. Unfortunately, in our Sangha, we don't have taboos or dogmas, or we don't have prohibited things that couldn't be discussed. So that's my view of what pragmatic Dharma is. So when I use the examples of learning how to become an engineer or an electrician, for the teacher or the school to be able to teach students how to become electricians, there has to be clear understanding of what it is and what those basic skills are that the student needs to learn. So this is something that I've given a lot of thought during my years of practice, and this is something that I emphasize. I don't give lectures. I'm not a scholar. I'm not academically oriented. I haven't even read that many Dharma books. I've read enough to know that what they say, but I just don't want to waste my time, and I don't want to waste my students and my friends' time, because I wasted my time enough for everybody. So I don't want that to happen to my friends. And yeah, what I was saying about pragmatic dharma is that in order for us to learn something, we have to have clear basic instructions, not vague nonsense that goes to all kinds of directions, possibly has some fancy thinking or fancy poetry or something. So the way how I look at teaching the Dharma is really, really simple and direct. Just like learning a practical skill, such as learning how to ride a bike or learning how to make electricity in a building, something like this.
Just to get this straight, let's take, for example, dynamic concentration, how you teach it, which is with shouts. Many martial arts students use shouts.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily recognize the nature of mind, because they don't have the instruction to have kind of their mind on it or their awareness on it when they are doing it. And this would be then the Dharma instruction of yours, right?
Yes. I would just add to that example of martial arts, because I've done a lot of martial arts in my life since I was a boy. And actually the first formal instructions of meditation I got from my judo teacher when I was 7. So, I started doing sitting meditation with my judo teacher when I was 7 up until when I was about 12 years old, 6 days a week. So, but yeah, I've seen it happen in martial arts, like basically any martial arts, any style of martial arts you go to, they use their body in a very dynamic way. They tense their muscles and they exercise focus, for example, punching something or kicking something or doing some kind of a choke or whatever, like a lock. And there's also often the element of using their voice strongly, especially in Japanese martial arts. And it's actually interesting to mention that, in Finland, we have a tradition of going to a hot sauna. We go to a room that is 70, 80 Celsius degrees. We go to a hot room with hot steam. And after hot sauna, which is one kind of a shock, we might go and swim in an icy water in a lake or swim in snow. So that's one shock in the sauna, another kind of shock in snow or icy water. And what happens at martial arts halls and when going to sauna is that it snaps people out of their mind. So I think that is the natural state, what appears. People can relax. It's just this soft, natural state of mind. But because, and people do that. People go to martial arts training sessions a few times a week, and they go to sauna in Finland once or twice or 3 times a week to repeat that. Not only to wash themselves up, but to have that experience, that relaxation again. And that is natural state. But people don't have the understanding or knowledge to understand that sauna is just or snow is just a way to access or reveal this state of mind that could happen anywhere, everywhere. So, and the same thing with martial arts. I remember many times when looking at people at training sessions that they became very soft in their body, bright in their eyes, very settled, grounded, because of the natural state. But then they go to the dressing room and start talking shit about other people, and that's when it becomes clouded, or start thinking about any kind of self-based stuff. So in martial arts, usually it's not methodologically included recognition of the natural state in the teaching. It's just something that kind of accidentally happens in the side because of that martial training.
Mm-hmm. I think this makes the point very clear, that the natural state happens naturally a lot for people when they get shocked, or when something surprises them, or when they do sauna or bungee jumping or orgasm or whatever. It happens in these moments. But what was missing, and what is the main point of the Dharma practice, is actually see what is happening in these moments. what changes in the way of perceiving things.
Yeah. And that's actually a good point, that the value, the gift of Dharma is to, people go from one release. Sometimes sometimes it's said that people chase from one high to the next high, whether it's through a drink or sex or whatever, exercise, something. But I think it's more fitting to say that people go from one release to another release. And what's the release? It's getting out of the mind. So yeah, I think it's very, very common. And yes, you started saying that, about the role of a traditional Vajrayana Lama. So I think there's a lot of benefit in spending time with senior practitioners and teachers who are professionals. Teachers should be professionals of what they do. So there's a lot of benefit in that. But, having said that, I think it's unnecessary. Like I mentioned earlier, it's unnecessary to have any kind of worship to another person, or like this unhealthy religious thing. It's unnecessary. What is enough is just to be sincere and honest in any kind of relationship, including that between teachers and students. Just be sincere. That's enough.
Yeah. This dependency that can develop between student and teacher is not something that is constructive for Dharma practice. Like even when students get a pointing out instruction and have that recognition, they might doubt it again, which is very naturally that our conceptual mind starts to doubt again. Oh, did it really happen? Or when kind of the flash is over for a moment, and then it's very counterproductive if you think, okay, now I need to wait for the Lama to come back to my town so that I get another pointing out instruction. But until this time, I cannot really do much about it. And this is where the practices of Pemako Buddhism shine. I think this dynamic concentration gives you a way to make that cutting through this recognition happen again and again and again and again, as much as you basically feel.
And one thing that I would like to add is that, in pragmatic Dharma, experiences and attainments are openly discussed. And I think that the reason for that is that there is absolutely nothing special in attainments. There's nothing special in awakening. There's nothing special in further shifts or further maturations. Just like I was speaking of engineering school or electrician school, you know, it is of benefit for everybody who are learning that the information is available openly. And I think that one of the problems in the Buddhist culture, in the Dharma culture at large, is that these things are not openly discussed. But the main point is that, just like I was mentioning, the universal Mahayana teaching that all sentient beings have Buddha nature. So we have Buddha nature, and people have shifts, but then they are not openly talked about. Why not? It is of benefit to everybody to have proper information, first-hand information available that they can then use and gain confidence and gain their own experience. So, yeah, I think that open information is essential. And there's nothing, absolutely nothing special in that. That's the whole point, you know. When you advance in Buddhist meditation practice, have those insights, shifts, you become yourself. You become sane, you become fresh, you become clear. You don't become woo-woo weird person who, you know, talks about weird things all the time, and, you know, it's not like that. It's just you come to know yourself. And if speaking openly about knowing yourself is how could it be harmful? It possibly can't, except for those who are jealous. There was a thunderstrike just now. So if it makes people jealous, they should study their minds. If people become jealous because somebody shares out of sincerity their experience with the truth of being, the truth of existence, there's a big problem there. And this is also like it's just a matter of culture. We have, during the past 2000 years, there has developed a culture of not speaking about these things. But if we look at the style of the example of Western education, people learn about all kinds of things from engineering arts to science to arts to music to poetry through education. Like poetry is something very abstract. Painting, music is very abstract. Nevertheless, people benefit a lot from this secular type of reasonable education. The same should be in Dharma, I think, because it would really benefit everybody. And that's the essential thing we want from Dharma if we have existential issues. If we have existential issues that we want to solve, you know, none of this dressing up, using a certain kind of gown every time you practice, or doing certain kind of rituals, or just the external form of it, it will not satisfy you. So if you have a real motivation to practice the Dharma, it is only the natural state that will feed and nourish you. So this is the way how I see it. And this is the way how I want to do Dharma work. Because I wasted so much time, like I described, and I don't want that to happen to my friends.
Beautiful. This is very encouraging, I think, for all the viewers, and to see with such clarity that there is possibility to question old ways, to question ways that might seem essential part of the teachings, but this is I think this is one of the benefits of this pragmatic Dharma movement, that people are getting curious again and courageous again to actually look into this old ways of teaching it and question certain things about it, but never the core teachings, and make it a living reality and a living teaching again. And you begin to see, aha, wow, there is so much flexibility in it, and dogmatism is really kind of calcifying it into something very unflexible and narrow, and it gets narrower and narrower and narrower.
Yeah, but that's how the mind works. That's how samsara works. That's what happens to all religions over time. I remember I recently read an article. I forgot who wrote the article, but there was an explanation of, like a historical explanation of the Mahamudra tradition. And in that article, it was said that, I think it was Saraha, one of those Indian Mahasiddhas, who is considered one of the main figures who started the Mahamudra tradition. I'm not actually 100% sure if it was Saraha or somebody else, but I think it was Saraha. And Saraha had writings that, are really simple and really directly to the point. But then what happened when Mahamudra teachings came to Tibet and the monastic system was, strongly established, is that, they started giving less and less emphasis for those very direct, pithy teachings. And what came to the place of it was this complex, ritualistic, formal stuff. That's how religions. That's what happens to all religions.
Yeah, I can imagine that the Mahasiddha writes a poem and says, "Yeah, go into the forest and let everything just happen. See that everything just happens," like giving a pith instruction, and then this text. Then comes the teachings afterwards, the people afterwards, and say, you have to read that text, you have to get transmission on that text, and then it's all about that text and not what the text says. It's not about going into the forest anymore and get that experiential understanding, but it's all about worshipping that text that comes from a Mahasiddha.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually like one of the points that I think it's absolutely necessary, and that's common sense. Sivakami, my teacher, used to say, she used to speak of common horse sense, so that you're really, you're using this.
Yeah.
Because you've been given it, so use it.
Beautiful. Yeah, let's have a look at the questions. I think only one question I think might be interesting. And for the end, in your experience with the Pemako Buddhist Sangha and all these people you had the possibility to teach and accompany for a certain period of time, or even until now, there are people who progress very fast through the bhumis. And then there are people who have been on it for years and who are still very dedicated and beautiful practitioners who have not yet opened the 11th bhumi. Some do it in 3 months and some do it in 2 years or 3 years. What's your take on that? Why is that? And what are the ups, the pros and cons of a fast progressor? The advantages and disadvantages, and the slow progressor. What's your experience with that?
So I don't know the exact number at the moment, how many people have in our Sangha, how many have opened all their bhumis, but it's something like 35. So it's roughly about half, and the other half is still in the progress of it. usually through our practice, we have the two-part formula for awakening. And my first book is about that. And we have that technique that enables people to wake up very quickly. The quickest of those awakenings has been on page 12. That's Monica, who woke up reading the book and reached page 12. And then the longest guidance, one-on-one guidance that I've given has been 5 or 6 weeks, I think. 5 or 6 weeks continuing email dialogue based on that practice. But nevertheless, even 5, 6 weeks, even 6 months would be really fast. I did 8.5 years of a lot of sitting every day, So it's all very relative. Sometimes people who ask guidance from me, they are very discouraged when they don't wake up during the first week, for example. The second week, they already start, is there something wrong with me? They get a bit nervous, but, I always remind them that, it's all very relative, But I would say that with the two-part formula, that's the formula. We found it, and it's not only we, actually. I have friends in traditional Tibetan Vajrayana. I have one friend who is a Vajrayana Lama in a renowned tradition, and he has taught two-part formula to his students, and he said that it works really, really well. So, and he also said that his teacher, what he learned from his teacher for the same purpose, it's almost identical what they use in that tradition. So, yeah, in general, people wake up quite fast. And after the first shift, first bhumi opening, we recommend taking up rainbow body yoga, our main tantric practice. Then those consecutive bhumis start opening up. The fastest case is one student friend from Ireland who opened all 13 bhumis in 2.5 months. So he had those shifts every 4 or 5 days during those 2.5 months. And the longest case is myself. To me, it took from November 2011 until November 2016, so 5 years to, wait a second, no, from November 2011 until December 2016, so 5 years and a month.
Mm.
But then again, I didn't practice what I teach. I practiced some bits, but along the way, I have also synthesized our way of teaching in the guidance of our masters and developed the method, kind of honing it for modern lay people. So why to some people bhumis start opening quicker than for others? There is always, with Vajrayana practice, there is the requirement of bodhicitta. That is very, very important. If bodhicitta is not there, if genuine care for the existential well-being of others, if that is not there, not much progress. So developing that care, contemplating suffering, samsara in one's own case, what are the consequences of that to myself, and what are the consequences to others, is really important. It's very, very important to understand what bodhicitta is and why it is the main engine of all Mahayana Buddhism. If that is not there, you will not you will only cultivate from your own personal point of view, which is kind of a lower vehicle view. So bodhicitta is very important. Sometimes people are too focused on getting results, and this creates an obstacle because it kind of keeps you in a certain stance, in a certain position, and you don't relax. So those shifts come if you let them come. So it's very important to just enjoy, basically. Be relaxed and enjoy. And the results come by itself. If you're only focusing in the results, like I have this one student in UK who has a long career as a businessman, and he's a wonderful man. I really, really like him, but he's had this problem of just focusing on opening the second bhumi, and it doesn't. So there you have it. Expand your view. Think for others. Start thinking in a like a big, compassionate way rather than just me. Or if you think in terms of me, illuminate it from the inside. Become aware of it. It's kind of the same thing saying that developing a wider, bigger view or lighting it from the inside. Saying the same thing basically. So, and sometimes it simply takes after the first bhumi opening, sometimes it just takes 1 or 2 years to get the second opening. In some cases it doesn't, but in some cases it does. And that's just the way how it is. However it is, however it comes, relax and enjoy. Just keep chopping through, keep cutting through the mind, keep making the whole with those dynamic concentration, and enjoy that freshness. Enjoy that basic state.
I think this beautifully synthesizes the traditional approach and the fresh pragmatic approach. What you just said. You have the pragmatic approach is it takes into account the goal and the what works. It takes efficiency into the account. It doesn't make a mystery out of the workings of the dharma. It makes them clear and makes an efficient and effective path possible with the mappings, like the 13 bhumi model or the traditional models that you have in Mahamudra with the 4 yogas, or these mappings help. They make you focused, they make you dedicated on the end goal, that this is clear from the beginning, and that this is a very important point. But this can go to the extreme that you then take the result as the path again, like I need to get there and don't really do the work that is happening right now, relaxing into this very moment, which is as it is, regardless of the attainments. And you have the other extreme, that you sit down on the meditation cushion and fall into a samsaric dullness and think this is, it feels good, it feels neutral, it's this has to be right, and not correct. This extreme of being too relaxed and being too ambitious. So I think your practice brings this very well together, these two extreme, into the middle way of focusedness, clarity about the path, clarity about attainments, clarity about the role of experiences and everything, and also clarity about the extreme of mental dullness, that you can actually get too relaxed about it, and yeah, this synthesizes it beautifully, as well as the preliminary practices of the traditions, where it's all about developing the mind that is ready for the dharma practice. And if you are too selfishly oriented, it makes sense to do preliminaries to develop this bodhicitta, this mind of enlightenment, so that you open up that shell of self-importance so much that you are even able to begin to see what it's about.
Yeah, yeah. You said several points there.
Sorry.
We've been talking a couple of hours, so all these points kind of, I noticed that, oh, that was a good point, and it passes through the same moment. From my own experience, both as a practitioner and as a teacher, I simply can say that dynamic concentration has been used in like some traditions and lineages within Tibetan Vajrayana for hundreds of years. I have not ever in this life, I have not had a formal relationship with any teacher from Tibetan Buddhism. So I don't have any, how do you say, like a vows of secrecy to that direction. I'm not in that sense involved with the tradition, but I know that some traditions have used dynamic concentration, just like we do. And actually in Japan, I also trained in a Shinto training hall that used dynamic concentration a lot in a systematic fashion. In Tibet, I've talked about this with a number of friends who are lamas in Tibetan tradition, and they usually just shout 1, 2, or 3 times. But the way how we do it, like 50 shouts or 100 shouts or even 300 shouts in one sitting, in one session. I got that idea from Japan, from Shintoism, because I lived in Tokyo. I lived in a training hall where we did this. But again, it was a bit different from, the way, that's a Shintoist mind training thing, and we are having a Buddhist view. So they got that clarity of mind, just like martial artists or people who go to sauna do. But, there is the explanation and understanding of it is not the same as it is in our style of practice or in Dzogchen. So, the reason I'm saying this is that it is very easy to access the natural state if you have the right tool. I just moved to this new apartment that you can see behind me, and I live just next to a supermarket. And I have never owned a drill before, like an electrical drill. And I bought myself a cheap one. And then I brought it home and started drilling the walls, their stone walls, to hang up those tankas. And these drills it was just powerless, It just didn't work. So I took it back and went to the hardware store and bought a proper expensive electric drill. And it went in like a knife into a butter, just through. And there you have the difference between good and relevant practice and poor and irrelevant practice or a tool.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that this tool, dynamic concentration, it just gets the job done. And then for anybody, it cuts through the mind, cuts through that, like I used that analogy of paper bundle before. It accomplishes that. But then, practicing with the Sangha, meeting the teacher, meeting practitioners, talking with practitioners who have more experience, that's always beneficial. For Dharma practitioners, that's the best thing you can do. Hang out and converse and become friends with practitioners, other practitioners who are as sincere as yourself.
Yeah, that was an amazing talk. Thank you very much for this very vivid and alive exchange, Kim.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
For everyone who is listening now and who is getting a spark of interest in Pemako practice and dynamic concentration, all the concepts we discussed, in the link of this video you find many links, for example, to the Pemako Buddhist website, where there are all the informations you need. You have the Pemako Buddhist YouTube channel, where you find demonstration of all the practices we talked about. You have demonstrations of dynamic concentration in all varieties of Guru Yoga, of basically all the practice that don't require an empowerment. You also have links to getting an empowerment. They are done frequently in Pemako Buddhism by our lamas. At the moment, Carl from Norway, he does it beautifully. Every few months there is an empowerment where you can get this transmission to practice the Tantric teachings, the Tantric mantras. What else to say? We have online events coming up. I don't know if this podcast will be aired before or after. There's the summer retreat coming up, but there will be online retreats more or less regularly from now on, I believe.
Yes, I think all the live retreats. I hope that we get to live retreats in this autumn, hopefully in September in UK. But I also hope that from now on, all those live retreats will be also online simultaneously, so that people who can't make it on location, they can join through the internet, through Zoom.
Awesome. So that's a possibility to join the teachings, to join the Sangha and actual practice sessions. And I highly recommend to check them out.
Yeah, I wish that. Thank you for doing this interview, Ugi. I hope that, I realized that I used a lot of different kinds of technical terms during this interview, and I hope that people just find their way through those terms and are not overwhelmed by them. I hope this brings benefits to many.
Beautiful. So everyone, thank you for listening. The next podcast will come up sooner than the last one or this one.
Hopefully.
It won't take another 3 years. Thank you for listening. Thank you for having interest in the Dharma. Thank you very much, Kim. Thank you very much. My viewer.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening. And see you later. Talk to you later.